bookworms! Today I'm gonna do a video all about whether or not I read my 2019 most anticipated releases. So every year at the end of the year I make a video about the books that I'm most looking forward to in the coming year, which is kind of standard. Most people on BookTube tend to do that. I usually split mine up into a fantasy and science fiction video and a contemporary slash thriller video. That way I can cover more books and hopefully you guys will be able to find something that you might not have heard of otherwise, instead of just covering like the most popular fantasy releases. So last year I made a video that was a follow-up video to that about whether or not I read my 2018 most anticipated, and I thought that was really fun and just a really interesting way to see like what still held my interest throughout the year, what I got to, what I didn't get to, what I still want to read, and I decided I wanted to do it again for 2019, although I know that we're quite far into 2020 at this point, but I still thought it would be fun to look back and reflect. So I'm going to include both of the books that I listed in each of those videos in this video. I'm going to start with the science fiction and fantasy books, and then the latter half of the video will be the contemporary slash thriller books. So first most anticipated was The Wicked King by Holly Black, and yes, obviously I read this. Not only did I read it, I read it twice, and at this point we hadn't known that the Queen of Nothing release was going to get pushed up and also be released in 2019. Otherwise that 100% would have been on this list too, but so far, so good. Next up is The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman, and this is another one that not only did I read it once, but I read it twice because I enjoyed it so much. I read it really early and then I wanted to reread it before I read The Deck of Omens, which is the conclusion to this duology, and I have since read that as well. I think it actually comes out next week from the date that I'm filming this. This is another one that ended up being a favorite for me. Next up is The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, and this is another one that I did in fact read, so I am 3 for 3. I really liked the characters in this one, but it wasn't a new favorite for me. Next, I am unfortunately breaking my streak here with King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I have not yet read this book, but I did finally finish the Grisha trilogy, so that's a plus. I'm glad that I did that at least, and I do plan on reading this one soon. I just know that it's going to be quite a while before we get the second book in this duology. At this point, like after the hype died down and stuff, I was like, I think I'm just gonna wait like until closer to when that one comes out. Next on my list was Enchante by Gita Trelease, and this one I really wanted to love because it's a fantasy story set in Paris during the French Revolution, so it sounded super interesting to me, but unfortunately I didn't love it. I ended up DNFing this one at 165 pages, and I thought it was fine, but I wasn't like super invested in it, and I decided to just put it down, and I obviously haven't reached for it, so I like half read this one. Next was Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is another one that I did not get to. This is a super long fantasy standalone novel. I heard such mixed things about it. It's just such a big book that it seemed so daunting to pick something up that like one of my best friends specifically hated, so I ended up not reading it, but I'm still curious if I would like it, and I actually do own a copy on Kindle because I just didn't foresee myself carrying that giant book around. If I want to read it, I do have it. I think I might try it at some point in the future, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Next is Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. This one I did in fact read, and this also ended up being a new favorite for me. I really loved it. It's the story of Magnus and Alec, and it takes place during the Mortal Instruments series, so it takes place, I think it's after book 3 or book 4, I can't remember right now. I loved this one so much. Next was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. This one I also read, but this one I didn't like. I ended up giving this one like 2.5 stars, in that range, but I remember not enjoying it while I was reading it, and I felt like I was constantly pushing myself to get through it, and I was really disappointed because obviously I was looking forward to this. It was on my most anticipated list, and a lot of other people did seem to like it, but it just didn't work for me. Next on my list was Finale by Stephanie Garber, and this one I did read and I really enjoyed it. This was the conclusion, the third book in the Caraval trilogy. I really loved books 1 and 2. Book 3 wasn't my favorite of the bunch. I think book 2, Legendary, is still my favorite of the 3, but I still did enjoy it because I like the characters so much. Next was Sorcery of Thorns, and not only did I read this one, but this ended up becoming a new favorite book of mine. I just adored it. I thought it was so beautifully written. It was such an incredible like fairy tale-esque fantasy. It was so beautiful, and if you're a book lover, it's something that you'll very much enjoy. You definitely saw this on my best books of of 2019 list. It seriously was just one of my favorites. Next up is The Beholder by Anna Bright. This one was like a Cinderella meets the Odyssey retelling, and I did a major unhaul of books over the summer. Was it summer? No. I did like a major unhaul of books last fall, and I picked out a bunch of them where I was just going to read the first chapter, and then from that I would determine whether or not I was gonna get rid of the books. I didn't film anything about it. It was just like a personal project of mine so that I could clear out my library because it was getting overwhelming. And I ended up reading the first chapter of The Beholder and I didn't love it. I didn't feel like compelled to read more of it, so I ended up DNFing it and I haven't read it, though I know that my library has it. And the reason I felt comfortable DNFing it without like having read past that is because I know that it's accessible should I decide that I want to go back to it. But I have quite a bit of TBR books at the moment, and unless something is really like pulling me in, I'm probably not going to invest my time in it. Next is The Stormcrow by Kaylin Josephson, and this one I haven't read yet, but I still plan on doing so. I think it sounds really interesting. The finished copy of this book is beautiful, and I'm really hoping that I will enjoy it and then I will definitely pick up a copy for myself. It sounds like such an interesting concept, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but I do plan to. Then was The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen, and this is another one of the ones where I read the first chapter and decided that I wasn't really that interested in what was going on, and I ended up unhauling it, but it's at my library should I decide to read it, but I don't think that I will. Next was The World of Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas, and unfortunately this book didn't come out, so I could not have possibly read it. The release date keeps getting pushed back, and at this point I think it's unknown, so we'll see when that ever happens. Sarah finished writing the Nessa and Cassian book, and I'm sure that that's going to be going through edits, and then she's also working on the second Crescent City book, so I don't know when this is going to happen, but I'm still holding out hope because Throne of Glass is my favorite series of hers. Next was The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. This one I did in fact read. This one was supposed to be like the return of vampires to YA fiction, and I was really excited for it, but it ended up reading more like historical fiction than like vampire fiction. While I really enjoyed it for what it was, and it was quite beautifully written, it wasn't what I went into it expecting, and that kind of like shifted my opinion of it a little bit. I just wish that it had been marketed differently because I was so excited for this like return to vampires, and then vampires like really didn't play that much of a role in the story until like way into the end. So I liked it. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to read the next book in the series, but I haven't fully decided just yet. Next is one that I'm super ashamed about, but I still have not yet read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This was probably my most anticipated of any of the books on this list. Like, I was really looking forward to this book. I still really am excited to read it. I just have been like intimidated by it because I have such high expectations after loving The Night Circus so much, and it's been so many years since that came out. So I've just been like nervous, and then I had a lot of family stuff happen last year where I just wasn't in the mindset where I could really focus, and I don't want to read this book until I know that I can devote like 100% of myself to it, if that makes sense. So I'm like really looking forward to the day when I finally go for it. Next is The Night Country by Melissa Albert. So this is another one that didn't actually come out in 2019. It ended up getting pushed back and it came out in January of 2020. I have not yet read it, but I'm definitely planning on doing so. I think I get a pass for this since it didn't come out in 2019. Then moving on to the contemporary and thriller section of the video. So first on my list was Famous in a Small Town by Emma Mills. I did in fact read this book. I didn't like it as much as her other books, but I've held on to my physical copy of it just because I've loved her other books so much, so I've wanted to like collect everything that she's written. But as more time passes, I have been more seriously considering unhauling this one, especially now that like the new covers for her books don't even match, so I have less of an attachment to it. I still have to read Lucky Caller though, and that'll probably be the determining factor for me. Next is Fame, Fate, and the First Kiss by Casey West. This one I did read, and boy did I hate it. This was probably one of my least favorite books that I read last year. I think I gave this one 2 stars. It was like one or 2 stars, probably 2 stars, but I was not invested in these characters. I had really high hopes for it because it was really cool that it was taking place on the set of like a zombie film, but I did not like it. It just did not work for me. The main character read very immature and it was rough. Read it, didn't like it. Next is The Art of Losing by Lizzie Mason. This one I also did read and I did really enjoy. It was definitely a tougher book to read because it was about like alcoholism. So it was a little bit of a rougher read, but I thought it was handled really well and I really liked it. Next was Spectacle, and this one I did not get to, but I'm still interested in. I don't know why. I guess it just kind of like fell off my radar. I never ended up getting a copy of it. It wasn't available at my library, so I just never got around to it. And same thing with my next one, which is Killing November by Adriana Mather. This one, I did notice that it just recently got added to my library though. I think it's because it's a Macmillan book, and libraries spent a lot of last year kind of in a battle with Macmillan because Macmillan didn't want to release their new titles to libraries until like a couple of months after they came out, and there were all of these petitions and stuff, and I'm pretty sure that they finally like rescinded that and now libraries are able to access the Macmillan titles, but a lot of libraries were kind of boycotting their titles completely at that point because it was so ridiculous what they were doing with the new releases. So I never got around to reading this one, but it did recently show up at my library, so I am curious to check it out. Next is The Princess and the Fangirl by Ashley Poston. This one I also did read. I really enjoyed it. I didn't like it as much as Geekerella, but I still enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to the third one, Once Upon a Con, which is like a Beauty and the Beast focused one. That one was supposed to come out in June, but I think it got pushed back to August. Next was Serious Moonlight by Jen Bennett. This one I did read and I did enjoy, although it is my least favorite of her books that I've read so far. I actually just read her newest one, Chasing Lucky, which unfortunately is another one that got pushed back until November of this year, but I loved that one. So I am definitely like a Jen Bennett fan. I have read quite a few of her books at this point and they've all delivered. Like, they've all been solid, excellent reads. Next is If I'm Being Honest by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Broca. And this one I read and I really loved it. I thought it was really great. This one was inspired by The Taming of the Shrew, the Shakespearean story, and it was a modern retelling, obviously, and it was so great. I really enjoyed it. I actually just read their newest book as well, which comes out on Tuesday from filming this video, and I also love that as well. So this author duo is definitely an insta-buy for me. Next was Somewhere Only We Know by Maureen Gu. This one I did read, but I didn't enjoy it. There were aspects of it that I liked, but I didn't like the dual perspectives. I'm used to Maureen Gu writing from just the female's point of view, and I liked that better, and I didn't like the guy in this one. I felt like he didn't have good intentions and there was kind of no consequence for his actions throughout the book, and that really bothered me. So I ended up not loving this one. Like, I read it, it was an easy read, but I just didn't love it, unfortunately. Next is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This one I did read. This ended up being a favorite book of the year for me. I loved it so much. This is another one that was also in my best books of 2019 video. I think everyone has read this book at this point, so there's not much more to say about it, but I personally really enjoyed it. Next is Virtually Yours by Sarvanes Tosh. This one I haven't yet gotten to, but I still am really interested in reading. It sounds like a really interesting concept, but I just never got around to it. Then we have Maybe This Time by Casey West. This one I also read, but I also unfortunately didn't love. This was kind of the point in the year when I was like, maybe I just don't like Casey West anymore. I really liked her older books, and her middle books, but her recent ones just really haven't been doing it for me. Yeah, I unhauled it. Obviously, I don't have it anymore, but yeah, that made me really sad. I'm still on the fence about whether I'm gonna try reading her book that came out this year or if I'm just gonna call it quits with Casey West altogether, which breaks my heart. Next is Rated by Melissa Gray. This is another one that I have not read yet, but I do really want to read. This also had a really interesting concept. It was kind of like a Black Mirror-esque story, and it's pretty short too. I realized last year when I was going back through my stats, I read virtually no thrillers last year, which was really unusual for me because in the past I had read so many thrillers each year, and by so many I probably mean one a month, which is more than zero for the year. I think because I spent so much time reading high fantasy last year and really long epic fantasy, I tended to read contemporary in between those for a break, whereas I used to read thrillers as my way to break things up in my reading life. So I do want to focus on reading more thrillers this year. Next is 10 Blind Dates by Ashley Elston. This book I did read and I loved, and you guys will definitely know that because I have filmed so many videos about this book. I think I definitely did at least 3 or 4 videos last year that were like just pertaining to this book because I honestly loved it that much and I cannot wait for this to be adapted. And this is the UK cover. It just was closer to me than the US cover. And then lastly is another book that I'm super ashamed that I haven't read yet, and that is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I actually didn't read either of Leigh's new releases last year, which I'm noticing while I'm going through this list. But like I said, I didn't really read that many thrillers. I didn't realize that this one was also going to be a little bit fantastical. A lot of my friends who read it didn't love it, but all said they think that I would really like it because it has a lot of the like elements to the story that are things that appeal to me while I'm reading. So I'm really excited to get to it. It's on my list of like 10 books that I have to read in 2020, and I'm 100% planning on doing so, but I haven't done so yet. And yeah, this and Starless Sea were honestly probably my 2 most anticipated books for the entire year, and I didn't read either of them because I'm a failure. So those were all of the books in my videos. I think I did pretty well overall. I'm gonna count how many I actually got around to reading right now, and I will let you know my stats. So out of 17 science fiction and fantasy books that I was looking forward to, I read or DNF'd 11 of them, and then 2 of them didn't come out. So that's 13. So out of 17, I read or DNF'd or they didn't release 13 of them, which is pretty good, I would say. So there were really only 4 books on here that I didn't get around to reading. And then out of contemporary thriller, I ended up reading 10 of the 15 books that I talked about. And of the ones that I didn't read, so there were 5 of them on the list that I didn't get to. And of those 5, 4 of them were thrillers, which just goes to show you that I really didn't read that many thrillers last year. I don't even know if I read 1 thriller last year, if I'm being honest. But yeah, that's my list. I think I did really well. I'm pretty proud of myself here going back and also seeing what I kept and what I unhauled because I didn't think it was a new favorite or something that I would reread. That's been kind of interesting. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed doing it last year, so I wanted to do it again this year. That's all that I have to talk about. Let me know if you read any of the releases that I've mentioned, if you maybe had any different opinions than me, or if there are any of the ones I mentioned that I haven't read that you think I really need to push to the top of my TBR. Let me know. Not Starless Sea, because honestly, with everything that's going on in the world right now, I definitely cannot focus on that, but I'm really looking forward to when I can. That's all that I have for this video, and I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!